Welcome to the I Told You So podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl. I started this podcast because I noticed an erosion in societal discourse and how normal conversations are often fueled by polarization. The I Told You So podcast offers an opportunity for healthy discourse and effective debate. I select topics to discuss and debate with listeners and guests of the I Told You So podcast. Listeners and guests predict what will happen in the future. I track predictions and announce who predicted accurately when those predictions become true. The podcast offers topics where listeners and guests can discuss and debate with the goal of predicting the future so they can proudly say, I told you so. My guest for this episode is Usha Reddi. Usha Reddi is a politician and an educator who is currently serving as a Democratic member of the Kansas Senate for the 22nd District. Usha has also served as a city commissioner and mayor for the city of Manhattan, Kansas from 2013 to 2023. Usha holds 2 bachelor's degrees, one in developmental psychology from The Ohio State University, and the other in elementary education from Kansas State University. She also holds a master's degree in educational leadership from Kansas State University. Usha immigrated to the U.S. from India in 1973 and moved to Manhattan in 1992. On this episode, Usha Reddi and I discuss the future of Kansas politics. So Usha, thanks for being here today. Really appreciate you taking time to visit with me on the I Told You So podcast. So let's start by asking you a few questions. Let me just start with this question. What has your experience been in the Kansas political sphere over the past 12 years?
Sure. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Yeah, I think I came to the United States, like you indicated, back in 1973, and I never really saw myself in politics. You're just kind of coming here for opportunities and trying to provide a future for your own children. But as a public school teacher, I was president of our local teachers union, and that prompted me to look at policies. And I ran for State Board of Education. And I felt when we were negotiating contracts or talking about work environment and students and goals and such, policymakers are very critical to that. And policymakers don't always have the expertise and content, but they are the ones who are driving the discourse, driving the policies, driving the entire budget. So I felt like that's somewhere I would like to be to make an impact. So I think when I ran for State Board, of course, I didn't get that position, but on the city commission, I think like any job, it takes a whole year or two to understand everything because everything is so complex. Budget is only one component, but there's so many partnerships, so many people, so many organizations you want to make sure you are helping or that you are a part of because they're all part of your constituency base. So during my 12 years, what I learned was even though you may not get elected by everybody, you represent everybody. And not to tune out the ones, whether they voted for you or not, because most often, most people have common shared goals and they're just trying to live their life and they all need certain resources. And I feel like that's a primary job as an elected official to make sure they are represented well. So though the 10 years on the city commission has definitely impacted my life because we are very close to Kansas State University, USD 383, Fort Riley, our nonprofits, our Chamber of Commerce. And it's interesting because each one thinks they are the power control of each of the agencies. But when you start going into each of their organizations, you get the big picture, which is very important to understand how all of them are interdependent. So I think that's helped me in the legislature as well. And tuning out noise, tuning out distractors and tuning out all of these squirrels that may be thrown at you and just focus on what needs to be done. And sometimes that can be boring, but it's okay to have politics be boring, I think.
That's good. I mean, you have exceptional experience for over a decade, and the experience you bring into Kansas politics is really superior. So really appreciate it. I'm just thanking you and expressing my gratitude for your service to the state of Kansas over these years. So thank you very much. So, what are some changes that you've witnessed, especially in this sphere you just talked about, this Kansas political sphere?
I think when I was here, I've been under Governor Sebelius was here, Governor Brownback was here, now Governor Kelly is here. I think we've seen a lot of changes. Sometimes our national politics kind of come down into our state politics, but you see a shift in our demographics. You see, when we're talking about agricultural areas and urban areas, our economic driver is still agriculture. And I think that's something we take a lot of pride in and try to make sure that we are having the resources they need to be successful. There's a lot of corporations now that own agriculture in the state of Kansas. And we're always trying to get federal funding as well as state funding back to our communities. Huge changes are broadband. Not everybody has broadband, and now it's almost like a utility, like water. You have to have it. Transportation is changing. I think when Dole was in office, we were very proud to have a lot of funding go to our roads and infrastructure, but we're also noticing now a lot of drought. And we never considered water as a huge issue, but now it is, and it's impacting our agricultural communities and our cities and local communities because we have, global climate change is happening, and we are having either really flash floods real quickly or really dry seasons for long times. Our seasons are looking very different. So I think all of those were different over the period of a decade. All of that has shifted. There's a lot more students that want to be involved in politics. They're more active. They're more of an activist mentality as well. They're not willing to just settle for status quo. They want to see change. And it'll be interesting to see what role they really want to play, because politics is a long-term game. It's not something that's done instantaneously. And sometimes our young folks might get really impatient because it's not done. But change happens over a period of a decade sometimes, or even longer before you actually see it. So I think there's shifts just in our leadership. For example, we didn't have to worry about Roe v. Wade before, and now we have states making those decisions. Healthcare, Medicaid expansion, for example, is something that we are still considering if everybody needs it in the state of Kansas. Our population sometimes ebbs and flows with going too far right or too far left, and oftentimes we do kind of end up in the middle. And regardless of who's elected, I think we try to do best by our constituents and our communities. Driving forces would be something like Wichita or Johnson County, Sedgwick County, Leavenworth, very highly populated areas which have a lot of representation, more so than they did in the past, and kind of drive some of the conversations in the legislature as well as at the federal level. So I think there have been certainly shifts, but local government is still where it's at. When I'm on the city commission, I would see people in the grocery store, wherever I go, if it's a soccer game, whatever it is, K-State, whatever games you go to, they know who you are. They often may not know your state legislators, especially not even your federal legislators, but they know. And their issues are typically very much about, potholes or pool fees or about just transportation, food, whatever it is. It's very local. And those are the things that are instrumental in making sure your communities are successful. And I think that's still where it is. But I think sometimes we get distracted by other issues that are thrown our way that we really didn't ask for.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So I really appreciate your perspective and just your experience witnessing some of these changes. I've heard the saying, I guess, as goes Kansas, so goes the nation. So what do you believe will be trends in Kansas politics as we look 5 to 10 years down the road?
In 2022, when the state legislature put the vote no on our ballot, constitutional amendment to take reproductive rights out of the Constitution, we were the first ones to have that. And Kansans showed up, regardless of Republican or Democrat, whatever it is. We voted overwhelmingly to keep reproductive rights in our Constitution. And that's when we say Kansas is always first in such things, right from slavery era, right from civil rights era. We were always breaking barriers. And now you see more states doing that. We were one of the first states to have 3 Democrat governors, female governors. All of them are Catholic. All of them are Democrats. We are the first state to do that. And you wouldn't think about that in Kansas. When I talk to people outside of Kansas, I always try to let them know, yeah, Kansas had a bad perception, and that could be driven by a whole lot of media sources, things that I don't have control over. But my experience in Kansas has been very peaceful. I've never felt I was at harm. I've never felt my kids were at harm. We usually talk about issues. Neighbors are very helpful. We have that Midwestern feel to it. But I also feel we are a very highly educated population. And I'm not sure everybody outside of Kansas sees us that way. We do make decisions based on what our community needs. I think we are very thoughtful in how we do things. I think the governor we have right now made sure we have a surplus budget. And I think those are the conversations that are going to lead us for the next decade or even 2 decades to make sure we have good revenues coming in, make sure we are building up our workforce, making sure we have the quality of life that people want to have to live in Kansas. Oftentimes children leave Kansas, right after they graduate, they want to experience the world, and then they have children and then realize cost of living, and then they come back. So we see that a lot of kids that are coming back to Kansas because the cost of living is much better. We do have some tendencies as far as our political nature is concerned, but we are still provide good quality of life as far as our parks, our arts, women's health care. We are still having those conversations, and I think we end up feeling more moderate than is people assume that we are. And I think each election shows that more and more so. Being a Democrat immigrant woman in the state of Kansas and being elected to office 3 times for the city of Manhattan and hopefully now back into the Senate says something. I'm the first Asian American woman to serve in the Senate, also as mayor in the city of Manhattan. And I never thought that was possible. But I think if we continue to have that dialogue of change without pushing people out of the conversation and instead pulling them into it, I think Kansas is headed towards a very prosperous path. And that's what I see for Kansas. I don't see gloom and doom. I see us moving forward and still being trendsetters and still breaking barriers across the board. So I'm very optimistic for the future of Kansas and its politics.
Oh, that's very encouraging to hear. And yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said about just the people of Kansas and how we listen to each other almost better than most states. And I've been to, I think, all 48 states except for Hawaii and Alaska. So I've been around. And I've been to 27 different countries. So there is something really unique and special about Kansas. So I think I really do believe that as goes Kansas, so goes the nation. So we really are leaders, but we're humble leaders. It's like We're the first to do a lot of things, but we're not bragging about it. We're just, this is what we do. And there's less polarization in Kansas, I think, than many states. So I hope the trend continues that way. I hope we can, meet together. I appreciated when Governor Laura Kelly came and talked at Kansas State University at the Lehman Lecture and really talked about how, we need to continue open discourse, just like you said, not push people out, but pull people in and listen to the needs of the public, which is what you have done in your career. Many people like you have done as well. And I just really appreciate that about the people in politics in Kansas. So hopefully we can continue to kind of be a beacon of light to other governments around the state as well as we move forward. So Usha, let me just say thanks to you very much for being a guest on the I Told You So podcast. So if listeners want to learn more, you can reach out to Usha Reddi, and she provided her email addresses, and I'll just read those and spell those: usha.reddi@senate.ks.gov. So I'll just spell it: usha.reddi at Senate, and that's SENATE.ks.gov, Or you can reach out to her personally at her email address at Gmail. It's ulr12345@gmail.com. So, because this podcast is about predicting the future, I have a few questions to ask those listening. So, what do you think is the role of the public in Kansas politics? And you don't have to be a citizen of Kansas to answer that, but what do you think the role of the public is, maybe even in your own state? And then, are national politics a predictor of state and local politics? And do you believe that that people care about politics? Do you, as a listener, care about politics? And will people care more about politics in the future? So I'd love to know. So let me know. You can text or call me at 1-785-473-3721 or send an email message to me at ITYS at BenKohlITYS.com. That's ITYS at BenKohlITYS.com, or post on any of my social media channels. So I do ask you to go to the I Told You So podcast website, and that's at BenKohlITYS.com to connect and get your own I Told You So items at the merchandise link. So you can get shirts, hoodies, hats, coffee mugs like this, and lots of other items. So the I Told You So podcast is hopefully a space for healthy discourse and effective debate with the goal of predicting the future so you can proudly say, I told you so. Also, if your business or organization is interested in advertising on the I Told You So podcast, please let me know that too. So thanks for tuning in to the I Told You So podcast, and thanks again to my guest, Usha Reddi. Followers of the podcast are very important, so please follow, like, subscribe, leave a comment, give a high rating, and share with your friends. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl, and I hope to hear from you soon.